clear defiance of Muammar Gaddafi's
In 1970, I went to Alaska as an aviation missionary. It was about that time that it was being made known to everyone that we had major oil finds on the North Slope of Alaska. I shall never forget, the pipeline, Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline, was built 1974, 5, and 6, and in the year 1976, I got up one morning and went over to Arco Base, and as I walked in the door, a gentleman whom I knew quite well said to me, "Chaplain, would you like to see something exciting today?" I said, "Well, yeah, I'm always in for excitement. What do you mean?" He said, "Get in the pickup truck and let's go out to West Dock." And as we rode along, he explained that they had just drilled into numbers of wells a brand new oil field. And they said, "We're going to release some oil today, find the pressure, see what the oil is like." And he said, "Chaplain, you may find this very interesting." So we arrived out at West Dock, sat there a few moments. All of a sudden, we saw a big plume of something come up out there about 2 or 3 miles out in the Arctic Ocean. And he was excited. He said, "Come on, let's go back to Arco Base. I want to see the statistics of actually what they're showing out there at the well." We got back to Arco Base, and I remember we walked up to the second story and walked into the office of the person who was producing the entire east side of the oil field. And I have never seen such excited oil men. There were probably 8 of them standing around a table and looking at things that day. And one of them looked at me and said, "Come on in, Chaplain." He said, "It won't matter. You may as well see it. This is exciting." And as I walked in, I said, "What has happened?" He said, "We have just drilled into one of the largest oil fields ever discovered on the face of the earth." And he said, "This is exciting for America." Well, I remember that day I went back and got a good night's rest that night, and the next morning wanted to get up bright and early and get back to Arco Base, and I thought I'd see on the front pages of the headlines of the newspaper from Anchorage that huge new oil find. As soon as I got back that morning to Arco Base, the security guard caught me at the door, and he said, "Chaplain Williams, I want you to go upstairs, sit down in Mr. So-and-so's office," called him by name. And he said, "Don't you say a word to anybody." He said, "I hope you haven't said anything about what you saw yesterday." I walked in the gentleman's office, and in a few moments he came in and he said, "Chaplain, what you saw yesterday, I think I'd be careful." He said, "We've just ordered that information classified." He said, "We will not be producing that oil anytime soon." And I said, "You are not going to let the American people have their own oil, bring back the great American dream, give us the opportunity to have gasoline at a reasonable price again?" And he said, "Chaplain, no." And I said, "Why not?" I said, "This is America's oil, on America's own soil." He said, "Chaplain, we will not produce that oil field until the price of crude oil goes to somewhere between $150 and $200 a barrel."
And this was in the late 70s?
This was 1976.
Okay.
Oil was $32 a barrel. And I thought in my mind, 100 to 150 to $200 a barrel. I said, in my mind, I thought, this is preposterous. There's no way. The world could not stand $200 a barrel oil. And you haven't heard one thing about that. The only place on the face of this earth you'll ever find this recorded is in my book, Energy Non-Crisis, which now, of course, is out of print. It wasn't long after that that some very unusual things happened. After the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline was over with, I decided that I had a moral obligation. I positively must tell the world what I saw. And I wrote a book entitled The Energy Non-Crisis. It was 1980. And just after I tried every way I could to remember everything I had seen on the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline, but understand I was not a trained oil man, I was just a chaplain. And so my book might not have been word perfect, but I remember just after my book came out, I had a phone call one day from a gentleman. He was livid. He was so angry that he was beside himself. And he said, Chaplain, your book came out, and he said, Atlantic Richfield has just fired me. Now, he was one of the high-ups, pretty close to being on the board of Atlantic Richfield itself. One of the people who had given me so much information over the years. And I said, what has happened? He said, they found out that I allowed you in that room that day to see what happened at Gull Island. And he said, as a result, Atlantic Richfield has fired me. He said, now, Chaplain, your book, Energy Non-Crisis, he said, there are just a few things in that book that are not a lot of perfect. And he said, they're going to discredit your entire book because of that, because they don't want this information getting out about Gull Island. And he said, would you allow me to rewrite your book for you and make it a lot of perfect? Oh, he was angry. And I said, sure, I'd be more than happy for you to. He did. He rewrote my book, Energy Non-Crisis. They have never discredited one word of it because it was word perfect. But he wrote another chapter in the book, himself personally. The title of the chapter was, If Gull Island Doesn't Blow Your Mind, This Will. He told everything. He told the depth of the field. He told the pressure of the field. He told the perforations of the pipe. He told everything that happened that day. And when my new edition of the book came out the following year, there were some other things that took place. There's only one place on the face of this earth that this is ever recorded apart from my book, The Energy Non-Crisis, and it's only alluded to. You may remember back in those days that the John Birch Society was quite popular. And there was a reporter with the John Birch Society by the name of Alan Stang. He found out about this gentleman, and he came to Alaska, and he said, will he let me interview him? He did. This gentleman was so angry until he gave an interview to Alan Stang, and he reported it in the American Opinion magazine. And if you ever want to go back and get one of those copies about 1981, 82, you'll find the only other report that's ever made about this anywhere on the face of the earth, but it authenticates exactly what I saw back in those days. Now, at that point, this gentleman and I were invited to speak at Pro America. Back in those days, they had big conventions around the world, a group of very active American ladies. And this gentleman and I were asked to speak at the Pro America convention in, I think it was out on the West Coast in California, in San Diego. I remember that night, this gentleman and I were sitting on the platform. He was to speak, and then I was to speak. And I saw him almost shaking. And I said, what's wrong? He said, look in the back of the room, those two men that just walked in. I said, who are they? He said, one of them is the CEO of Atlantic Richfield. He said, the other one is a very prominent oil man. He said, Chaplain, you'd better be careful what you say tonight. He was scared. Shortly after that, he gave me the face of the chaplain, but it also indicates exactly what I saw back in those days. Now, I've been that back by Atlantic Richfield. He said, I've been given quite a sizable increase in salary, promised a big pension, and he said, they've told me that I shouldn't communicate with you and give you any more information. He said, they're sending me to Houston to train all the new executives that are going to Prudhoe Bay. Now, all of this is so significant because he told me 35 years ago in 1976, we will not produce the oil from America's own soil. Now, you remember this goes perfectly along with what Mr. Henry Kissinger said? When Henry Kissinger went to those Arab countries who were forming OPEC, the oil-producing countries of the world, and he said to them, we will buy your oil. American companies have produced your oil fields. You've paid them back now. And in turn, you will buy our T-bills and our Federal Reserve issues, which of course, they didn't know economics. These men were not trained in what was happening with the Federal Reserve. They didn't know that the Federal Reserve was not an agency of the federal government any more than Federal Express is. Don't fool yourself at
I
all.
don't think a lot of Americans don't even realize that. They think that the Federal Reserve is a government agency, but it's not. It's a private entity.
A private entity, right. And they did not realize that America was creating debt. We began the process of moving our industry abroad just after this, the New World Order. And now we're creating debt, but whenever you create debt, we have 14 trillion plus now. And whenever we create all this debt, the interest, you don't have to worry about paying the debt back. Never mind the $14 trillion. Congress could care less about that. They know it'll never be paid back. It's the interest on the debt that can't go unpaid. And by these oil producing countries of the world buying our T-bills and our Federal Reserve issues, they put money back in to pay the interest on the national debt. And this is the only reason that America can even be sustained today without having a total financial collapse, is because China, once it began to get our industry and become the great power it is today, as it was planned way back in those days when Daddy Bush opened up China as the emerging country of the world, every bit of it was planned around the fact that today, the year in which we're living right now, a major crisis would take place. And this is what is so significant, to see it unfolding literally before our eyes today.
Mr. Co-President Nigel Farage, Freedom and Democracy.
Well, good morning, Mr. Van Rompuy. You've been in office for 1 year, and in that time, the whole edifice is beginning to crumble. There's chaos. The money's running out. I should thank you. You should perhaps be the pin-up boy of the Eurosceptic movement. But just look around this chamber this morning. Just look at these faces. Look at the fear. Look at the anger. Poor old Barroso here looks like he's seen a ghost. You know, they're beginning to understand that the game is up. And yet, in their desperation to preserve their dream, they want to remove any remaining traces of democracy from the system. And it's pretty clear that none of you have learned anything. You know, when you yourself, Mr. Van Rompuy, say that the euro has brought us stability, I suppose I could applaud you for having a sense of humour, but isn't this really just the bunker mentality? You know, your fanaticism is out in the open. You talked about the fact that it was a lie to believe that the nation state could exist in a 21st century globalised world. Well, that may be true in the case of Belgium, who haven't had a government for 6 months, but for the rest of us, right across every member state in this union, and perhaps this is why we see the fear in the faces, increasingly people are saying, we don't want that flag, we don't want the anthem, we don't want this political class, we want the whole thing consigned to the dustbin of history. And we had the Greek tragedy earlier on this year, and now we have the situation in Ireland. Now, I know that the stupidity and greed of Irish politicians has a lot to do with this. They should never ever have joined the euro. They suffered with low interest rates, a false boom and a massive bust. But look at your response to them. What they're being told, as their government's collapsing, is that it would be inappropriate for them to have a general election. In fact, Commissioner Wren here said they had to agree their budget first before they'd be allowed to have a general election. Just who the hell do you think you people are? You are very, very dangerous people indeed. Your obsession with creating this euro state means that you're happy to destroy democracy. You appear to be happy for millions and millions of people to be unemployed and to be poor. Untold millions must suffer so that your euro dream can continue. Well, it won't work, because it's Portugal next. With their debt levels of 325% of GDP, they're the next ones on the list, and after that, I suspect it'll be Spain. And the bailout for Spain would be 7 times the size of Ireland, and at that moment, all of the bailout money has gone. There won't be any more. But it's even more serious than economics, because if you rob people of their identity, if you rob them of their democracy, then all they are left with is nationalism and violence. I can only hope and pray that the euro project is destroyed by the markets before that really happens.
Thank you. The next speaker.
And I think it was Rahm Emanuel, President Obama's person, that says, never let a good crisis go to waste. Understand that when you have, first off, a corporation, any major corporation, will never allow any of their higher executives or their board members serve on the board of a competitive company, right? What good? Why? The company wouldn't want them. Why is it then that Timothy Geithner, the Treasury Secretary for the United States, and Ben Bernanke, the Chairman of the Federal Reserve, both sit on the board of directors for the Bank of International Settlements, which is the central bank for all 55 of the Earth's central banks. And this, one reason I believe is happening is it's pushing us to a financial crisis so that we will eventually adopt a one world currency that is being promoted by this Bank of International Settlements and developed by the International Monetary Fund. It's called SDR, Special Drawing Rights. And it's already used in the 55 central banks of the world today. It's a global currency that's only used at the highest level of banking. The devaluation of the dollar, because of the Federal Reserve's actions on quantitative easing, has lowered the value of our currency significantly. Recently, the dollar was only worth less than 77 cents. If, and I believe this is where you're headed with this information about the regime change, and one reason I believe that the State Department memo and promoting regime change is in fact to cause us to default on our notes or debt to these Arab countries, because maybe under the heading of we will not do business with terrorists, okay, the Muslim Brotherhood looks like they're going to take power. If that be the case, this will cause a default from the Federal Reserve on these Treasury notes, and could be the demise of and the destruction of the Federal Reserve, a private entity that backs the sovereignty of the US dollar.
So the American dollar must collapse in order for them to bring in their new world order. Now, this is exactly what was told to me way back in those days. We will not produce the oil fields of America. Mr. Kissinger said to the oil-producing countries in the Middle East back in those days, we will not produce the oil fields of America until, and he said, we won't produce them. You go ahead and buy our T-bills, our Federal Reserve issues. He knew good and well that this would take care of paying the interest on the national debt. I was told in 1976, we will not open the oil fields of America. Oh, folks, we have been betrayed. We literally have been done in by Washington, D.C. Every one of the scoundrels up there ought to be thrown out.
Stars left. But here's the one thing. I actually missed something yesterday, and somebody called me on my radio program yesterday during, around lunchtime, and they said, Glenn, why is it, you always say, look at the other hand. What's the other hand doing? Everybody's talking about AIG. You know what? I didn't know at the time. I didn't know until about 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon yesterday. Then I figured it out. I've been telling you for weeks, don't be distracted by the big news of the day, because I think a lot of it is a smokescreen. The Citibank offices, the AIG. Yesterday, I fell for it myself. While everybody, including me, was taking sides on the AIG bonuses, something so much more important, history, happened yesterday. The Fed announced that it is going to pump $1 trillion into the system by buying debt from our Treasury. What does that mean? You know, I asked my producers today, I said, why is nobody covering this? And they said, Glenn, it's too complex. Nobody really understands this. It's hard to explain. Please, America, please stay with me on this. They have lowered interest rates as far as they can. What happened yesterday is a last-ditch effort. You know, it's like they put our entire economy up on the roulette wheel and said, yeah, you know what? Let's let her roll. Keep it on black, 17. To put this into perspective, think of America this way. She's like a sick patient, and she's got one of those nasty staph infections, you know, and the doctor's like, oh, we'll just give her a little penicillin and everything will clear up. And then they try something else, and pretty soon you're in the hospital. And that's when you open up your eyes and you see everybody, you're now in an isolation room there in the hospital, and they've all got masks, and they're hanging a little bag of IV, and they're like, oh, don't worry, everything is going to be okay. Oh, dear God, he's going to die. They usually, you know, the last line of defense for antibiotics is Vanco. That's it. If it doesn't work, you're dead. Yesterday, about 3 o'clock Eastern, the last line of defense was hung over the patient called America. But we were all, including me, too focused on that AIG thing. Oh, that scandal. Here's what all of this means. What they did yesterday afternoon is they started borrowing money from ourselves to pay ourselves for programs we can't afford. You know, it's like I said, you know what, Glenn, I just would like $1,000 for M&Ms. Well, Glenn, I don't think you should be spending that $1,000, but I really want some M&Ms, Glenn. Okay, I tell you what, I've got the money right here. Well, it's not actually money. What it is, you know, it's an I owe me. So, Glenn, I'll give it to you. Oh, my goodness, Glenn, thank you so much. I'm good for it. Really, I am. They're moving money from one pocket to another. It doesn't work. I'll show you why the situation is deathly serious in just a minute, but first I want to show you something over here. I asked the art department, and they are so good. I asked them to show how much is $1 trillion, because that's what we printed yesterday. $1 trillion. I think we have lost sight on how much $1 trillion is. So here's $100. We all know $100. There it is, $100 bill. Next, $10,000. What does that look like stacked up in $100 bills? There it is. Now $1 million stacked up in $100 bills. It would fit in a big suitcase. Now $100 million. I don't know why they insist on keeping me so fat, but there I am. Okay, so there's $100 million. Now let me show you $1 billion. If it was all stacked up, that's how big, about the size of your car. This is going to get ugly. This is what $1 trillion looks like. That's Fat Glenn right here. That's $1 trillion. That's how much money yesterday the Fed created out of thin air when they said, oh, let me take it out of this pocket in an IOU, you print the money and we'll put it in this pocket. This is why yesterday, in the time that I was on the air, gold shot up $50. The price of gold is up $75 in 18 hours after they announced this. Investors, the people with money, the people that know what this means, they're not stupid. They're getting out of the dollar. The dollar deflated and went down in the biggest drop. I think it's the third lowest since 1970. Look, let me explain what this means here. Let me play doctor for you, but I'm not going to talk to you like you're a third grader, all right? I am sick and tired of people not giving you the benefit of the doubt and just thinking that you can't handle anything except a partisan argument. Here's what it is. The antibiotic that we just gave ourselves, $1 trillion of money that we just manufactured. This has been tried before, but it has never, ever worked in the history of the civilized world. Never. It ends in Zimbabwe. It ends in the Weimar Republic. It ends with wheelbarrows full of money for bread. Can this time be different? I don't know. Maybe. We sure hope so now, don't we? But we've got to have the guts to make some life-changing decisions here. We have got to have our government stop spending so much money. It is time, America, to go up peacefully and surround the Capitol and say, hey, guys, stop spending money. You're destroying the value of our dollar. Unthinkable pain is coming in the short term, but I would much rather have that. I'd much rather have a depression then a depression and a complete collapse of our monetary system and our dollar. That's what's happening. We're printing dollars at an alarming...
I am so glad in this election recently that the American people woke up to the fact that there's got to be a change in Washington. They knew this. They knew these oil fields were there. It's in the congressional record. But way back then, they knew the plan that they had devised for the New World Order. And that year, he said, we will not produce those oil fields until we have crude oil to the price of $150 to $200 a barrel. That brings me to something that happened in 1983, and then I'm coming down to today. 1983, I was sitting in my house in Kasilof, Alaska, where I was a missionary at the time, and had a phone call. Now remember, this gentleman who showed me Gull Island, he had not been in touch with me for 3 years' time. Atlantic Richfield wouldn't let him talk with me. He called me on the phone. I was amazed. And he was very talkative. And he said, "Chaplain, do you have any speaking engagements around the country anytime soon?" I said, "Yes. I start out in Seattle, Washington in a few weeks, and months later I wind up in Southern California speaking day after day." He said, "Would you like the world to think you're a prophet?" And I said, I had spent so many hours with him at Prudhoe Bay. And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Tell everybody that a few months from now, the price of crude oil is going from $32 a barrel to $10 a barrel." I mean, it couldn't happen. It would impact the Middle East like it would be unbelievable. And I said, okay. I had my audiences laugh at me sometimes. They knew it couldn't take place. It did. 3 months later, exactly as he had told me, the price went to $9 a barrel on crude oil, 1983 approximately. Now, why? I asked him later, I said, "Why did you do this?" He said, "Chaplain, we had to show OPEC that they have no control over the price of a barrel of oil. This is so significant." He said, "You've sat in our board meetings. You know who controls the price of a barrel of oil." He said, "We do every day in London and New York." And he said, "The Arabs and OPEC has no control whatsoever over that price of oil." Now, let's come down a ways. At this point, after 1983, you noticed the dismantling of America. Everything seemed to be moved abroad. The industry base was destroyed. And then just recently, we had General Motors bankruptcy. We had Chrysler bankruptcy. Now we have our major industry, some of the biggest in the country, Boeing and Caterpillar, who is #1, by the way, on the New York Stock Exchange, have moved abroad. And they've moved to China. Where have they moved? They've moved to China. Why? Every bit of this was planned. I knew about it many years ago. I couldn't believe it. At the time that I heard it, I said, it just can't happen. But now we're seeing it unfold in front of our eyes. But here is the part that is so startling. One day I was on the phone with this gentleman, and he used an expression. I was fascinated by it. He used an expression entitled the Devil's Messiah.
The Devil's Messiah?
Devil's Messiah. I kind of had to listen to him for a while, and finally I asked him, I said, "Well, this Devil's Messiah, what is it?" Well, he went on to explain, and I could readily understand, it's not the Antichrist of the book of Revelation. It has nothing to do with that whatsoever. This has to do with their plan of the dismantling of America. And he went on to say to me, he said, "Chaplain, in order to bring America to where we want it in our New World Order, we had to remove the God of America that made it great." And I went on to pick him to find out what he was talking about. First of all, they had to introduce evolution in the schools so that the children would think that they were nothing but glorified apes, so that they could act like them. This brought in all of the sex craze and the drug craze. And they had to remove the Ten Commandments from the courthouse steps. They had to bring in the 501c3 organizational status for churches and bind pastors so that those pastors could not talk about presidential candidates and say certain things from the pulpit. And over a period of all of these years, the New World Order has been in the process of destroying the foundation, which is the God of America, in which this country was founded on, that made it so great, that our founding fathers knew and talked about in those early days. And all of this was a plan for someday to bring it in. There's one thing I learned when I lived with the elite of the world. That is that they use buzzwords. And I remember that in the code of ethics, remember I had been a pastor of a church for 12 years prior to going to Alaska. And when I lived with these elite, I could comprehend some of what they were saying because I'd done so much counseling with people, plus I'd taken psychiatry in college in order to get my degree. And as a result, I learned that the elite have a code of ethics. Now, it's not your code of ethics and mine. It's quite contrary to that of the Bible. But the elite of the world do have a code of ethics. And in their code of ethics, part of it, one of the facets of it is, we must tell the world everything we're going to do before we do it. Now, if you know how to listen to their buzzwords, you will know what they're trying to tell you. For instance, you remember George Bush Sr. used the expression one time, Daddy Bush, New World Order. He was the first one to ever introduce that expression. He used to also use an expression, 1,000 points of light. Nobody knew what he was talking about. His elite friends all knew what he was talking about. And he was telling the world what he was going to do, but he was saying it in such words that later on he would say, I told you so, why didn't you listen? Mm-hmm. And every bit of it was a plan of them doing what they wanted to do, from the building of China to the getting of trillions of dollars worth of our paper into the hands of the oil-producing countries of the world, to the getting into the hands of China over $1 trillion worth of our national debt, and now we come down to where we are. The elite of the world have a timeline. I was told that their timeline is 2012. They wish to fulfill certain things, and barring divine intervention, they will do what they want to do. Someone said to me on a radio talk show last night, in fact, I had the privilege of appearing on Coast to Coast, which is the most listened to radio talk show in the world. Supposedly we had 63 million listeners. And someone said to me on the talk show, the timeline, is there anything we can do about it? I said, you must do something about it. You have no choice. Your children, your grandchildren, your great-great-grandchildren are going to be slaves to the elite of the world unless somehow the New World Order is stopped. And then another person on the talk show said, well, I think I should rise up. I said, no, the last thing in this world that we want is revolution. That never works anywhere. It can't. It brings on even worse crisis. But what we need is an orderly return to the Constitution of the United States of America as our founding fathers intended it and created it. What are we going to get if the elite have their way? Well, this next few minutes will be very startling. I hope that I'll be able to explain it in such a way that you'll understand, keeping in mind, of course, that you in America, all of us, are educated people and do have comprehension and are able to put things together. So here goes. Back a number of months ago, Rodney, I appeared on your radio show, and I said that I had been told that within 4 to 5 months we were going to see a crisis in the Middle East. You verified that earlier in the DVD. I did not know where it was going to be. I remember very well back about 6 or 8 months ago, a radio talk show host called me on the phone, and he said, Chaplain, is there going to be a crisis with Iran? Of course, we had our warships over there. Everyone was expecting some war in the Middle East with Iran. And I went to one of my elite. I have two of them that I could pick up the telephone and call. I know their phone numbers. And I called him and I said, is there going to be a crisis in the Middle East with Iran? He said, no, Chaplain, there's not going to be anything with Iran. I asked them when they said within 4 to 5 months there's going to be a crisis in the Middle East. I said, where is it going to be? They would not tell me. They knew. They knew that Egypt would be the target for the beginning of something that was going to bring about an ultimate fulfillment of their timeline in the year 2012. And this is what is so significant. The crisis in the Middle East will continue to expand. It will grow. It will grow very rapidly. It is going from one Middle East country to the other. Now, there's a reason for this. Go back to what was said to me at the time that the Gull Island field was discovered and brought in, and then the information classified. And the gentleman said to me, we will not produce these oil fields of America until we get the price of crude oil to $150 to $200 a barrel. They have to take it there. How do they do it? They've chosen to use the Middle East as a method of doing it. There will be conflict, there will be more crisis such as is in Egypt. And the one thing that I think probably frightens me more than anything else is the chant that they had when they said, we're going to Israel. You saw it. It's earlier in the DVD. We put this in as a sound bite and a visual bite. It frightens me to think when Israel gets involved in all of this. But at some point they will. And someone said the other day, is this a fulfillment of prophecy? I said, I wouldn't dare say that that is. I said, yes, I've read the book of Revelation. Yes, I've read Ezekiel 38 and 39. But I said, I would not guarantee that this is the point in which God seeks to fulfill this. It does concern me much as to how Israel is going to fit into this. But I do know this. It will go from one Middle East country to the other, and when it hits Saudi Arabia is the greatest supplier of crude oil for the United States of America. What basically you're going to see is you're going to see the prices of crude oil, the price of gasoline, the price of groceries at the grocery store, the airline tickets. You're going to see major change in the United States of America in order to bring it into what they want in the fulfillment of the New World Order. Keep in mind, the name of the game is control. There were some of these people that I rubbed shoulders with that could have written a check for $1 million a day for the rest of their life and never spent their fortunes. It's not all about money. In fact, now it's going to be less and less about money because they must collapse the American dollar in order to be able to bring in the new world currency. Now, the new world currency is scriptural. It very definitely in the book of Revelation, we know that the Antichrist will have his mark. What type of a currency that mark will be, I have not the slightest idea, and I wouldn't begin to propose. But right now, here's my prediction based on what the elite have told me recently. The conflicts in the Middle East are going to spread. They're going to spread through all of the oil-producing countries. Many of these oil-producing countries will cease to be able to produce, like right now, for instance, Gaddafi. He has cut off all the oil supply, 1.9 million barrels, I think, per day. Well, that has to be made up somewhere else. Saudi Arabia says we'll step in and fill that gap, but they can't. They can't form that much production. So immediately we are seeing somewhere between 3 to 5 cents per gallon increase in the price of gasoline at the gas pump now. And I actually saw $4 a gallon just the other day, right here. You saw it, in fact, as we went by the station last night. You are going to see the price of gasoline and crude oil go up. You're going to see gasoline go up to $5, $6, and $7 a gallon. Be prepared for it. Get ready. It must happen in order for them to take it to $200 a barrel. So
There's one thing that people need to understand too, that a reason that prices increase, whether it be bananas at the market or your favorite loaf of bread or gasoline, is that the value of the currency which you're using to purchase it is not worth as much as it was the week before. So when we see prices go up by 20 cents per gallon or whatever, it could also be tied to the purposeful devaluation of the US dollar. So inflation is playing its role, as well as the price of oil or the limited access to oil in the Middle East.
Gasoline is still 4 quarts to the gallon. That has not changed.
That's right.
The gasoline today, you're paying the identical same thing that you did 3 years ago when it was $1.50 a gallon. The gasoline has not changed in price at all. It is still 4 quarts to a gallon. Gold. When gold was, 3 years ago, this individual said to me, he said, "Chaplain, our currency is gold and silver." And he said, if you want to spare the assets and put dinner on your dinner table, the only investment that you can make is gold and silver in order to do it. He said, that is our currency. I did. I begged people. I pleaded with people. Go and buy every bit of the gold and silver you can get. At that time, you could have bought an ounce of gold for between $600 and $700 an ounce. You could have bought silver for around $15, $16 an ounce. And I begged people to go and get. Now, today, you take that same gallon of gasoline and you pay $4 for it, but the gallon of gasoline is still 4 quarts to the gallon. The currency is the only thing that's changed. The gold is worth now $1,400 and some odd. The gold has not changed. It's still 1 ounce of gold, 1 ounce of silver. The only thing that's changed is the currency that you buy it with. Now, let me show you what the New World Order has indicated to me, the elite, that is going to happen. The crisis in the Middle East will spread from country to country to country. There is going to be major disruptions in oil production. All of this is planned. They knew it 30 years ago. I didn't understand what they were saying. I sat there in the office of this man when he said it's going to $150 to $200 a barrel. I was stupid. I couldn't understand what this man was saying. I couldn't comprehend that he already knew that 35 years down the line, that they were going to take it to $200 a barrel by starting a crisis in the Middle East so that it in turn would collapse the dollar. Oh, this is so dastardly. I must vary here for just a moment. I remember one day I'd been sitting with these people all day long. I'd been in the board meetings, I'd sitting in the vehicles with them, I sat across the dinner table from them. I was utterly flabbergasted. And I went back to my dorm room that night. Now keep in mind, I was brought up in a wonderful Christian family, had a marvelous godly mother and dad. I came to know Christ as my Savior at 11 years of age, and was a pastor of a church for 12 years before going to Alaska as a missionary. And all of a sudden, I'm thrown into the midst of this den of thieves, the elite, who think of nothing but the name of the game is control. And I had rubbed shoulders with these people all day long. I was at my wit's end. I went back to my dorm room that night. I'll never forget it. I laid down on the bed and I looked up at the ceiling and I literally cried out and I said, "Oh God, how can there be such dastardly people on the face of this earth that would have the audacity to control nations and people and start wars and destroy currencies as I'm seeing them do it today, and tell OPEC, we'll tell you what we're going to give you for a barrel of oil." Now, this is where we are right now. As this DVD is being made, we are seeing the crisis in the Middle East get to a fever pitch. And what is going to happen is they are going to create such a crisis that those oil companies, those oil producing countries that years ago were supplying the oil to us will no longer be able to supply it, but it's for a reason. They wanted to take it to $200 a barrel. But at the same time, it'll collapse the dollar. Now here's that timeline. I have been told that the dollar will be dead by the end of 2012. Now, I did not You know, you have to listen to these people. Their words are so important because oftentimes in the way that you and I think is completely different than the mindset of these people. They were not saying to me the dollar will be non-existent. Mm-hmm. That isn't what they said. Right. I had to listen to what they said. In their buzzwords, they said the dollar will be dead. That means you may take a wheelbarrow load of dollars to the grocery store to buy a loaf of bread. Now the groceries will be there. There's going to be no shortage whatsoever on the grocery store shelves. They can bring it in according to their New World Order from anywhere in the world anytime they want to. Have a freeze in Florida, they bring it in from some other country. Let there be an earthquake in California and they can't produce the crops as they should, they'll bring it in from somewhere. The grocery store shelves are not going to have any lack whatsoever, but you may go hungry. Mm-hmm. And I said, why? They said, because the currency will have devalued to the point. Are you beginning to see with what's taking place in the Middle East, with the making of China, the great power it is? We've removed Boeing aircraft from America. We've moved Caterpillar out of America. We've moved Chrysler out. We bailed out Chrysler and General Motors. And now General Motors is selling more in China this year than they sold in America. Yet we, as the taxpayers of the United States of America, bailed them out so they could go to China and sell more cars there this year than they sell in the United States of America. We have dismantled the United States to the point that we have nothing left. Where does a young person find a job? I was just talking to one of the people on the crew here a moment ago, and I said, where do you get a job when you get out? He said, I'm coming to the time you're talking about in 2012. It's sad, our children, what they have to face because they've intended to dismantle the country. Now, here is what's going to happen. Mark it. Please go back and review this DVD and compare it to your calendar. The Middle East crisis will grow worse and worse. Non-production of those oil fields. The price of crude oil, $200 a barrel. The dollar, it will diminish in its purchasing power to the point that the American economy will be in dire straits. Their timeline is the end of 2012. What are they going to do? They're going to solve the problem. Remember, they always create a crisis and they create a solution. What is the solution? I'm so glad you asked. The solution, they're going to build America's oil fields. I'm going to give you right now what very few people, you'll see it. Mark my words, 6 months, a year from now, you'll understand everything I'm saying. I have been told, and I was told, and this is what started this past week. The reason I was on radio shows sometimes by the hours and on Coast to Coast last night. He said, we want you there for 2 hours. At the end of 2 hours, his audience was livid. He said, Chaplain, we need to keep you another hour. On Coast to Coast, 63 million listeners, not because of me, because the people, they were beside themselves as to the information that the elite had given me. This all started a matter of days ago when I received a communique as to what they were going to do. And I said, I must tell the American people. I'm going to give you now the 4 oil fields that it's already planned. Then I'm going to open them up in order to provide America the energy that they need.
Then we'll become the hero because we've stopped doing business with the terrorists in the Middle East and we're producing oil here ourselves.
When the dollar collapses, folks, please understand the debt, 14 trillion plus in America. You can't even comprehend $1 trillion. 14 trillion plus. The interest on the debt is paid by the Federal Reserve issuing T-bills and securities. China, the Arabs, OPEC oil-producing countries, super wealthy people of the world buy those because they're the most stable currency on the face of the earth. Now, what is going to happen when the dollar collapses to the T-bills and the securities issued by the Federal Reserve? This was all planned when Kissinger went to these people many years ago, the Arabs, and said, we'll produce your oil fields, you must take a certain portion of that money and invest it in T-bills and securities issued by the Federal Reserve. He knew at the time he was going to double-cross them.
Because all this time we've been using the dollars that they paid us back to, for the T-notes that they bought the Treasury bills with while the dollar was high, and we're going to pay our notes back and give them worthless dollars to pay the notes off with, because the value would be nothing.